We're coming at you from the Billy C studio in Lake George, New York. I'm Bill Calogero, and it's time for Billy C's Change My Mind. But no, wait, there's more, because with today's Billy C's Change My Mind episode, we're combining it with our heavyweight spotlight, and my partner in crime with the heavyweight spotlight is my main man, Tony Triem, and Tony joins us right now. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Bill. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm doing okay. Tony, you know, I'm kind of laying this one on you. Normally we do the heavyweight spotlight, and you and I are all ready to rock and roll with our heavyweight spotlight. Except it's kind of like the Change My Mind. And what we've been doing is we've been talking a lot lately about the heavyweight division. And what Tony and I figured we would try to do is not only talk about the heavyweight division with the topic we want, but Tony's going to try to change my mind. Now, my mind hasn't been changed. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this. We've been talking the last couple of weeks about some of the modern heavyweights, Tony, the Lennox Lewises and the Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschkos being too big for some of our all-time great heavyweights like Jack Dempsey, Rocky Marciano, Jack Johnson, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm a big fan of the older guys, so to speak, and I've always said that, I don't want them to lose to these modern-day guys, but as human beings, we've gotten bigger in all sports. People are bigger, faster, stronger, and everything else. So I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate, and I want you to change my mind back, because I've kind of reserved the fact that, maybe a guy like Lennox Lewis, who was 6'5", 6'6", 250 pounds, in really good shape, could beat a guy like Jack Dempsey, who was, under 6 foot tall, less than 200 pounds, and all of that. So not only do I want to talk about that as a spotlight, but I kind of want you to change my mind, or at least try to change my mind. Tell me, would these greats that we're talking about, the Jack Dempseys, the Rocky Marcianos, and so on, could they have beaten a Klitschko or a Lennox Lewis or some guy that's, above 6'5", weighing 250 pounds, that's athletic?
You're throwing it on me today, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. You said Dempsey first. So let's talk about Dempsey and Klitschko. Yeah, I think Dempsey would beat either one of, or all three of them, Lennox Lewis, Vitaly, or Vladimir Klitschko. And this is why I'm going to say that. Jack could box or punch, and came in the ring, and he was ready to rumble when he came into the ring. He was a two-handed fighter who hit with both fists and hit hard. He hit with combinations, and he possessed extremely hard. He possessed a extremely hard left hook. He moved well.
Well, let me ask you this.
He bobbed even out. He weaved. He was quick. He was rough. He was tough, and he was powerful. In addition, he was game, and he was cool under pressure, and he fought whatever style was needed to win. He was and deep inside him, he carried a vicious killer instinct, and he did well against taller opponents, Billy. So yeah, I think Dempsey, with his style and his drive, if you will, yeah, I think he would get inside and he'd win. I think he'd beat all three of them.
Well, let's take a look at it for a second, okay? Now, the key words always when fighters, and I was guilty of this myself. Several years ago, I was like, Klitschko's, they're boring. They would have never stood a chance with some of these all-time greats and everything else. And even trainers today, even modern trainers who have fighters that are competing today, they start off the sentence with, all you got to do. When you say, how do you beat a Klitschko? How do you beat a Lennox Lewis? And they'll start off with, all you got to do is, and it makes me laugh, because everyone says the same thing. You got to get inside, you got to get below that jab, and you got to work the body, you got to test the chin and all that kind of stuff. Now, we know Jack Dempsey could have done that. Theoretically, Rocky Marciano could have done it. Jack Johnson was a different situation. All these guys. But my question to you is, how do they do it when, in Jack Dempsey's case, since we're talking about him, he fought Jess Willard. Willard was a big guy and everything else, but he wasn't the athletic specimen of a Klitschko or a Lennox Lewis. I mean, how does he get below this guy who's in such great shape and has the hand speed and everything? How does a Jack Dempsey, who's under 6 foot tall, weigh in less than 200 pounds? How does he do it? How does it happen?
Yeah, but Billy, you got to remember, Jack Dempsey used a crouching style of boxing, so therefore Klitschko's going to have to punch down.
Which is something.
He's not going to have any power in the punch.
Yeah, but wait a minute. Klitschko's specifically have developed. They've become very proficient in fighting the smaller man. As a matter of fact, I have been saying lately that I think that they may have trouble when they get into the ring with a guy as big as themselves, because they've become so used to fighting the smaller guy. They actually deliver their punches in a downward motion. So it's
straight stand-up fighters. They throw jabs, and that's all they throw, and then they throw their right, and they wear a fighter down. They're not going to wear Jack Dempsey down. Jack Dempsey takes punishment. He can take the punches that they throw. Jack Dempsey had a hell of a chin, and he would take punches to get inside. He was kind of like a Rocky Marciano in that respect. Marciano would take 10, 15 punches to get in and land one, and Dempsey was the same style. He would take their punishment and take their right, or their jab, if you will, that they use to offend everybody off. That's all they got in skill-wise, is their jab, which everything starts off with jab. I understand that. I'm not saying that jab's not important. It's very important in boxing. But all they have is a jab and a right cross. That's all they do. They stand straight up and throw the jab and lean back. Throw the jab and lean back. Dempsey could move. He had feet speed. He had hand speed. He had powerful combinations. He hit hard with both hands. He could take you out with either hand. He had a one-punch knockout punch. The Klitschkos don't have a one-punch knockout punch. They wear their fighters down, and then they take them out. They kind of like, and I'm not knocking Muhammad Ali, but it's kind of like Ali. He had great hand speed. He had beautiful feet speed, but he did not have a knockout punch. Muhammad Ali was a boxer, and he wore you down, and then he took you out. And the Klitschkos are kind of in that same category. If you stand in front of them and let them throw a punch at you, throw the jab, and throw the right, throw the jab, and throw the right, yeah, eventually they're going to get to you. Dempsey's not going to do that, wouldn't do that. Dempsey had a killer instinct. He'd get in there and fight you.
All right.
And he'd get in there, and he got in there to win. And he'd do whatever it took to win. And he would beat the Klitschkos.
All right, let's since we're talking about Dempsey, let's kind of focus on Dempsey here. Now, I agree with you about the Klitschkos. Stand-up fighter, very one-dimensional. All they have is that pulverizing jab, and let's refer to Vladimir because he's got the better jab. And, he comes out there and he keeps you, away, and he's got that right hand cocked and he's ready to deliver the punch. Now, I also agree with you that for a big man, for a guy that's 6'6", 6'7", whatever, 250 pounds, he doesn't have that knockout power you would expect. I agree with you there. I really do. But if you take a look at the guy who beat Dempsey, Gene Tunney. Gene Tunney was a boxer, and he was able to frustrate Jack Dempsey and stuff. Now, I'm not.
Dempsey hadn't fought in 3 years. There's a lot of ring rust there when he got in the ring with Gene Tunney.
All right. Well, the second fight. Listen, we're not gonna. We don't want to. We don't want you to reach into the excuse bag. All right, Triem. Come on, now. Come on. All right. So all I'm trying to do is make a point about the boxing ability. Right now, Gene Tunney wasn't exactly. And I know he's not one of your favorites, but he wasn't a Muhammad Ali in terms of a boxer and stuff. But he was very good in his day. He was probably one of the best. And a guy like Jack Dempsey had a little trouble with him, despite the ring rust or whatever. Now, I'm not suggesting that the Klitschkos are boxers, but the one thing that Tunney did frustrate Jack Dempsey was the jab. And I'm using that as an example because, just like you said earlier, the Klitschkos and Lennox Lewis, they did have a good jab. And, I think that when you have these guys that are so big and physical, and if they possess a jab to keep them more powerful and mean arguably more talented fighters like the Dempseys and the Rocky Marcianos and all the other fighters, Sonny Liston. I mean, we can go on and on and on. But once these big guys possess that jab and some athleticism, you don't agree that it would be a tough out for these guys?
Well, I'm not saying Jack Dempsey's going to go in there and he's going to knock either one of those guys out in the first round. I'm not saying that. Sure, he's going to have to work. And but technique, is a way to take advantage away from a stronger, bigger man. And Dempsey had a technique that could do that by his bobbing, weaving, his fluent of hand. He could throw a double. He would double up on his jab, and he'd throw a hook off of him. Lennox Lewis don't know how to do that. Klitschko don't know how to do that. All they know how to do is throw a straight punch. That's all they do. Dempsey could do any of the above and more. That's where his ability would take over, and he would get them in the later rounds. He's not going to knock them out in the first, second, third round, but he would get them in the later rounds. Dempsey trained in the day where there were 15-round championship fights. Today there are 12. A prize fight should be a championship fight should be 15 rounds. And in that time period, the older guys like Dempsey, Jackson, Johnson, Lewis, Ali, Rocky Marciano would take these guys and would beat them.
Well, the big thing, I really think what it boils down to is this. I agree that the fighters that we're referring to, the all-time greats, specifically heavyweights, talent-wise, the whole bag of tricks, the whole complete package is well beyond the talent level of a Klitschko or even a Lennox Lewis. I believe that. However, it boils down to the old saying, a good big guy will beat a good little guy, and that's what I think is the issue here when we talk about these dream matchups. Obviously, I don't have a time machine. You don't have a time machine. Well, I know you have one, but the batteries are dead. But, the thing is we will never be able to see it. The question is can a Jack Dempsey, can a Joe Louis, a Rocky Marciano withstand those jabs? Whether it's a 12-round, 15 or a 20-round fight, do they get pummeled? Do they try to get in under that jab time and time again and just pay the price for it and eventually get worn down?
Any great fighter of any era could probably compete in any era and be successful, Billy.
True.
To be honest,
you see now let me interrupt you.
Fighter today? No, we don't have a great heavyweight.
Exactly,
today.
And that's what I was going to interrupt you because I don't think, and this is where a lot of people disagree with me, but I don't think that the Klitschkos and even Lennox Lewis, I don't put them in that category. I don't think they're great fighters. Now by today's standard they are because their physical side, like you and I have talked about this, and I've mentioned this a lot. I don't believe heavyweights should be in the pound for pound category, and the reason why is because if you take a Klitschko, for example, and we both agree that he's got the jab and the power, but that's it. How does he become dominant in a welterweight division when everybody right now Jack Dempsey could have.
Yes, he could have.
Mike Tyson
could have. Light heavyweight. He could have been in a middleweight, and he would have performed well in all.
Exactly.
Where the heavyweights could not and will not. And you're right. I agree with that. I know I'm trying to change your mind. I don't know how we got stuck. How you stuck me with this one. I know I'm trying to change your mind, but you're right. A heavyweight should not be in a pound for pound because it don't work that way.
Well, it boils down to
the only one that does. The only heavyweight that did that I would disagree with you on that one, Billy, would be Bob Fitzsimmons, the first 3-time world champion, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight champion. And I think he could have be considered in a pound for pound as far as a heavyweight goes.
Well, so could we got to give credit to Evander Holyfield. He started off as a light heavy, went all the way up to heavyweight and was successful. So no, I know that there's an asterisk next to the pound for pound, but getting back to the heavyweight discussion, it's a tough nut to really, convince everyone that these big guys wouldn't have been able to dominate even our greatest heroes back in yesteryear.
The problem is, Billy, and I'm not criticizing anybody, so I hope none of the listeners take it that way, because I'm not. They only know the fighters of today. They're not old like you. Where you can go back and talk about Jack Johnson, you can talk about Jack Dempsey, and you can talk about some of these great old fighters, but Rocky Marcianos and stuff, but because they've never seen them. They've never seen them like you have and I have. We're the old goats. They didn't have that privilege of the Wednesday night and the Friday night fights that we had every week on TV. They didn't have they don't have the exposure to boxing that you and I had. And again, I'm not criticizing the listeners or nobody, so please don't take offense. But the old-time fighters, their lifestyle was different than today. Their lifestyle was tough. They worked in mines. They worked on farms. They worked in fields. You didn't see the pretty six-packs and the big bulking muscles like you see on a Holyfield or some of the other fighters of today. These guys you get a hold of them, you're getting a hold of a rock, but they didn't look muscular, but they were hard as a rock. The lifestyles were different. They were hungrier. They had to fight to put beans on the table. There was a drive there that you don't have today. Life has gotten softer. And because you lift weights and have all these big, pretty muscles, those muscles don't make you hit any harder.
No, hey.
They just look good. They're going to slow you down, if anything.
No, I agree. They were farm strong. I call it farm strength. Those guys that could,
farm strong. That's a great way to put it, is farm strong. You can't beat that kind of a man. And that's what the Dempseys and the Lewises and these old timers were. They wasn't big, pretty bodies, but they didn't have big spare tires hanging over their trunks either. You know what? They were rugged, tough, and ready to rumble. And you can't beat that kind of strong.
Tony's right.
You don't have that strength today.
Tony's right. One of the best fights I ever went to was the very first one. Tony took me ringside. We were both at the John L. Sullivan and James Corbett fight. It was great. It was great back then, Tony. But it's so hard to try and convince, and you're right, and today's world, they want to look at video and stuff, and unfortunately, there are videos of Jack Dempsey and Rocky Marciano and everything, and I say unfortunately because, they're not in 3D, they're not in color, they're not in, so you're not getting the camera angles, they're shot with one camera, they're shot with poor lighting, so they're shot with varying speeds, so, you can't really see and appreciate what these guys did, and the fight. And you're going
to get 10 seconds,
right,
or 30 seconds. I mean, you can't assess a prize fighter. The young sports fan today, the young boxing fan today, can't assess the man of the past in a 30-second clip.
Well, let me ask you this. Here's the most recent argument, and even our mutual friend Steve Lott, he's actually. Agreed with the masses here. Here's the thing. If you watch these fights, if you take a look at the fights, and that we weren't there. Obviously, we're kidding around. We weren't around to see Jack Dempsey beat Gene Tunney. I mean, to see Gene Tunney beat Jack Dempsey, or see Jack Dempsey knock out Firpo, or see all these fights of yesteryear, the Joe Louis regime, and all of that stuff. But we do know about it. We've read about it. We've watched a film and everything else. So my question to you is this: are we to accept the write-ups and the books and the history that other people wrote about these great fighters? And we all agree today that boxing is subjective. You and I can watch the same exact fight on television right now and look at the same punch, and we could be in a room with 5 other people, and all 7 of us see a different thing and swear by it, So are we supposed to just believe these guys from the history and assume that these guys would have beaten, the old-time guys would have beaten the bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic type? I mean, and again, I'm playing devil's advocate. I don't want to believe that, but are we supposed to?
Well, you know, you should do your homework a little bit here. If you're going to say Jack Dempsey is one of the greatest fighters that stepped in the ring, you know, you should have a reason why you're going to say that. If you say Lennox Lewis is the best man that stepped into the ring, you know, you should have done a little bit of study and looked at, you know, what he's done, who his opponents were, who did he fight, at what time did he fight the opponent in the opponent's career? Was it the end of his career? Was they both at their peak? You know, you got to look at. Because you got a great name there, and I'm going to throw this out, and it's not a true statement, but Jack Dempsey fighting Firpo, okay, and Firpo was at the end of his career. Well, that's not true. But if you didn't know that, if you didn't do some kind of research, you know, to say, are we to read stuff and accept it? Well, no, we have proven Matt Fletcher wrong in so many things, it's not even funny, and he was the guru back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, of boxing. He had the Bible of boxing. He had, you know, he was the man of all men. If you wanted anything, he was the go-to man if you want to know something about boxing. But we proved him wrong in so many ways since we've gotten into and studying records and studying fighters and watching films and doing things. So no, you shouldn't just read it and take it as the gospel. You should look at the fighter. You should do some research and find out if this particular writer is correct, because you're looking at a man's opinion, and when you go with opinions, you know what that means.
Right.
And you're right. You and I were at a fight here in Vegas when you were out here doing your show, and you and I looked at a fight, and you and I looked at it differently. When I called in for your post fight, I saw round 5 as a win for Chavez Jr. You didn't even see it. You didn't understand what I was talking about. So it's all in how the perspective and what you're looking at, and are you interested enough to find out if what the writer is saying is correct or not, or is it just an opinion?
Well, that's why this answer. That's why I don't think we can ever answer this correctly, because, you know, and it's exactly from what you just said. You know, I agree with everything you said. I agree with, you know, boxing being subjective, and you know, I don't care who the writer is. I don't care if he's the best writer in the world. You know, if he says, and that's why I'm not a big guy on the punch stats, because someone else is recording that. I mean, it's not like baseball or football where, you know, a statistic is a statistic. You know, he hit 5 times out of 10. That's a 500 average. I mean, you know, he ran the ball 10 times and he gained 2 yards a carry. That's 20 yards, you know. So, I mean, that's stats. Those are statistics. Boxing isn't like that. You know, if the punch lands, you say it lands. I say he grazed him. You know, another guy says, you know, it should have been a knockout blow. You know, so I mean, it's all subjective. So it comes back to something. You know, the Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame expert Steve Lott told me. He says, you know, it comes down to video. We have the video, so therefore, and he even admitted that it's unfortunate for these fighters that came during a time when there weren't video, like you know, some of these great early fighters that never made it on video. You know, so we're supposed to just dismiss a Jack Britton. You know, we're supposed to dismiss. You know, Sugar Ray Robinson as a welterweight because there's no video of it. You know, so it's a catch-22. You know, it's hard. And my big goal, and I know you're with me on this, is we want to try and share some of the historical aspects of the sport with the younger generation, so it's not forgotten. I don't want the Jack Dempseys and the Rocky Marcianos and the Jack Johnsons and so on and so forth, all these guys, Ezra Charles, Joe Louis, I mean, the list goes on and on. I don't want them forgotten because they came in an era where the media isn't as great as it is today. And I don't mean media by newspaper. I mean, you know, film media.
And Billy, you know, you can't answer that. You know, you can't deny that, and that's what I'm all about. It's all about keeping these great ringmen's memory alive. That's what I've said for the last 50 years, and that's what I've strived to do on an everyday basis. You and I agree on that 100%. I don't want them forgotten either. And the news media today and the Boxing Writers Association of America, they don't know boxing like they did in the past. They don't study boxing like they did in the past. And therefore, you don't have the coverage of boxing that you had in the past. You had umpteen magazines back in the day on boxing that described boxing. You had different viewpoints in every one of the magazines, but you could come to a consensus by studying those books and magazines and record books and stuff of what they were talking about and put these guys where they are today as great prize fighters.
Well, I
don't have that today.
Well, I could argue that point and say, well, today we have the internet. So now, when they used to write a story about a boxing event, and yes, one other thing, and I know you know this, but for all the viewers and listeners, there used to be, for every single newspaper in the United States, there was a boxing writer. That's right. On staff, there was a guy that did nothing more than cover boxing. Today,
but the computer is no smarter than the person behind it.
No, you're right. But the difference is that guy that went to Chicago to watch the fight and then wrote his story. By the time it made it to print, it could have been a day or two later. And in the early days, the Jack Johnson days, it was a week later. They used to show the films months later. And today we have the internet, which and Twitter and all these technical advances where. You're at the fight. I'm finding out what's going on in round 3 before round 4 starts. I already know what happened in round 3, and we're in between rounds.
Okay, but tell me this, Bill. Since we want to argue, and we're changing
we love
each
to
other's
argue.
Mind here. I'm changing your mind. Tell me this: what heavyweight today? You can use Klitschko. You can use anybody you want to use. I don't care who you use. What heavyweight today are you going? It stands out in your mind of a great fight that you're going to talk about next year, where you can mention Jack Johnson, you can mention Joe Louis, you can mention Muhammad Ali, you can mention Rocky Marciano, you could mention George Foreman, you can mention who can you mention Charles Sonny Liston, and you immediately, you or I and some of the other historians and a lot of the fans out there can come up with 20 fights that they did. It was phenomenal, and what a great fighter they were, and how they did this and how they did that, and their technique, and what a punching power. And Joe Louis let his hands do his talking. He was the quiet man. Okay, who are you going to talk about next week about today's fighters that fought and was as good as any of these men?
Before I answer that question, I want to go on record as saying congratulations to Tony Triem, because with this question that he just asked me, he has officially been the first person to change my mind. And I'll tell you why. Because just thinking about this question makes me realize that there's a lot of reasons why I couldn't say what Tony's trying to make me try to say, whereas you don't have the memorable fights. And the reason, I believe, is because it's not so much the boxer's faults. It's the way the business has changed. Boxing has changed. And therefore, as a result of why promoters and managers coddle their fighters and they don't fight those tough fights and they don't get better and they get risen to the top and all of a sudden they're 30-0 and they're fighting for a title and they have a title and this and that and they don't even know how to deliver a hook. The reason that boxing has changed so much and the way they coddle fighters and the way it wasn't like that back in the day where a guy coming up fought his way to a contender status and then fought his way up through the top 10 contenders, which incidentally there were only 10, and then he got his shot at a title. He fought quality fights all the way once he got onto that contender level, and that's why there's so many fights that are memorable, and today we don't have it. So whether or not we could ever prove that a bigger guy like a Lennox Lewis or a Klitschko would have been able to go back in time and beat Rocky Marciano or Jack Dempsey and the names that we were talking about, it doesn't matter because the sport has changed, Tony, and I think you're 100% correct.
Thank you. You're the only man that agrees with me, Bill. I have this argument on a daily basis, and you're the one that agrees with me. I've asked that question 1,000 times, and they don't get that question, and it's a shame because these guys in the past, they fought 60, 70 fights before they even were considered for a championship fight. They were well-seasoned, good, solid prize fighters, where today you have to try hard not to be a champion. Back then, it was an honor, and it was you were the toughest, the baddest man on the planet if you were the heavyweight champion of the world. And in a lot of cases, the heavyweight champion was better known than the President of the United States. You could ask anybody who the heavyweight champion was, whether they were a fight fan or not, they could tell you who the heavyweight champion was. Today, they just look at you and go, what are you talking about?
It's true.
They talk about how great he was, and he's had 10 fights, and he's got a belt. Well, he can't even carry the jockstrap of a great prize fighter. They don't know what boxing or fighting is all about yet. They haven't even learned. They're still amateurs, and they're calling themselves world champions, and I don't get it.
Nice.
And I love boxing. I live, eat, and sleep it every day. I wouldn't change my love for this sport for any other sport. But today versus the man that beat the man back in the day, you can't compare them, Bill.
No,
and their memory is going to last forever, where Lennox Lewis's and the Klitschkos are going to be forgotten. You and I won't let them be forgotten, but in 10 years, nobody will know who they were, except us, in the fight game, that really love the sport and follow it.
Well, the only upside to this is that I honestly believe, and Tony, we're already over our time. I know this goes quick, but we'll be doing it again next week. But the thing is this. The one thing I do believe, and I know we've talked about it, and I've mentioned it on my shows, I really honestly believe that we're in a upswing right now. The sport of boxing is on the rise. Now, whether it's on a good rise or a bad rise, that's neither here nor there. But I do believe that the popularity of the sport is slowly coming back. It's up to us.
Thanks to the middleweight division.
Well, thanks to a lot of the smaller divisions. I
Yes.
agree. It's definitely not the heavyweights.
Absolutely, and you're right. I agree. It is, and I agree. It's on an upswing, but it's not due to the heavyweights.
No, it's not. But what we need to do is we need to continue to spider out and hope that we can get fans to come and watch and appreciate. Because you know what, Tony? Nothing for nothing. There are some good, talented young fighters out there. Again, not in the heavyweight division, but there are some good, young, talented fighters that no one's ever heard of, and that's a whole nother story. The lack of promotion and introducing these fighters, despite all the media that's at their fingertips, with what we were just talking about.
You're 100% correct. There's a lot of talent out there today.
Well, we're going to bring it, and that's one of the reasons that I'm going to be out in Las Vegas with Tony, and we're going to bring that to you guys, and we're hoping for great things beginning this year. And Tony, I can't believe the time is done, but looks like we're going to have to pick this up another time, my man.
Man, time flies when we do these, Billy. We ought to do a 2-hour show.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Get something accomplished.
Hey, maybe we do a 2-hour show every day and talk about boxing. I mean, what about that? Geez. Oh,
you can't beat that, my man.
Well, listen, Tony, I appreciate the time, and we will be doing this again real soon. All right.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. And thanks, Bill, and thanks to the listeners, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. And by the way, I changed Billy's mind.
I was just going to say, you did, and you done did good, Tony. You done did good. So I'll talk to you soon, my man.
Thanks, Cal.
That's Tony Triem, and you can catch him on the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. Every single week we do a heavyweight spotlight, and that is what this was supposed to be, but Tony came in and stole the thunder. Everybody that's tried to change my mind, even though I kind of always, wanted to not accept the fact that some of these guys could beat the old-time fighters. Tony legitimately changed my mind because he asked me a question, and as soon as that question hit my mind, I knew that it had – listen, in my opinion, the old-time fighters would not have had a problem, or maybe I should rephrase it. They would have beaten a Lennox Lewis or a Vladimir Klitschko. Now, if these guys, if the Klitschko brothers or the Lennox Lewis had the same talent and had the same skill set as a Jack Dempsey or a Rocky Marciano or Joe Louis, then of course they would be unbeatable. But they don't. and that's the key. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Billy C's Change My Mind / Heavyweight Spotlight. Make sure you tune in right here on LDL TV next time. And don't forget about the Talking Boxing with Billy C show. Check out all the information on the website, www.billycboxing.com. Ciao.